the aristocrats are Kagame and his associates. They don't care about those people.
Did Kagame give order to shut down this aircraft or not? Who is Kagame after all? Is he innocent in what has happened in Rwanda? In what has happened in Congo? Is he really innocent? Or he is a criminal?
He's a soldier, and he was trained as a soldier. His work in Uganda was to help overthrow an existing government.
According to the U.S. ambassador to Rwanda, Robert Flotton, who testified in our case, in this late November 1993, he specifically told Paul Kagame that if Kagame resumed the war, he would be responsible for deaths on the order of the hundreds of thousands of deaths that were occurring at about the same time in Burundi after the assassination of the Burundian president.
The Hutus who were trying to escape the slaughter had three options: either to go down south into Burundi, or to go east into Tanzania, or to go into Congo through Goma. Now, the ones who ran into Tanzania, they were met at the bridge, and then the Hutus who were trying to flee into Tanzania were captured by the Tutsi forces, which had already captured that territory, dumped them in the river, and these are the people who floated down the river into Lake Victoria and Uganda. And then Paul Kagame and Museveni and their benefactors outside paraded these dead bodies as these are the Tutsis who have been killed by the Hutus, when it is the other way around.
I wanted RPF, who is taking care of me, food and shelter, to help me find my family, which I did not have then. So I was escorted by RPF from Kigali to Congo because I was searching for my family. I was myself too. I called people to say, come, you see, I'm not Tutsi. I did. They didn't kill me, so the people came. So they killed them. I'm guilty. So when I saw them killed, I never called again. I had to shut my mouth.
case of Rwanda, as bad as what happened in Rwanda was, it went absolutely according to plan. Habyarimana and his government were gone. The Hutu government of Burundi was gone. The border with Zaire, Democratic Republic of Congo, became more porous. Eventually, Mobutu was gone, and the entire area and its natural resources were up for grabs to the highest bidder. The U.S. being the world's only remaining superpower was, of course, the country that stood to benefit the most by this power vacuum, and it did.
Africa is typically presented like this, a continent of savages that need our hope. And this is perception management, this image, otherwise known as propaganda. The hope is in white, and that image means the white people are supposed to save the savages, and the four Africa part is in red because the white supremacist system that we live under likes us to think about Africa as a bunch of bleeding, savage people, a continent of bloodshed and disease and hopelessness. So this is the propaganda, and I'd like to show you a little bit about the reality. Working in Central Africa, it was quickly apparent to me that the reasons for the conflict were not being addressed by the mass media. The victims were not being prevented from, the war was not preventing the killing of innocent people, and instead, the wrong people were being blamed. In fact, it was a blame the victim scenario. Some of the people behind the wars in Central Africa take their... people that are behind the war in Central Africa can be traced from these individuals back in the 1980s in Uganda and Sudan. The guy in one of these pictures is Roger Winter. He's a U.S. covert operative. He's responsible for organizing covert guerrilla wars in Sudan, in Uganda, in Rwanda, and then in Congo. In the 1980s in Sudan, Roger Winter was backing the Sudan People's Liberation Army, providing weapons and covert support. From the Sudan, with the support of the United States, they backed a guy named Yoweri Museveni, who came to power in Uganda in the 1980s in a very bloody war. The victims were blamed with the killing, and the perpetrators were given carte blanche to develop Uganda using World Bank funds, IMF funds, the support of the United States, multinational corporations. The people that took power in Uganda moved on, took power in Rwanda, and eventually took power in the Congo. And you can see South Sudan is basically oil concessions. This is an oil map of Africa. Uganda, South Sudan, the Congo, Rwanda, it was like a continuous pattern of guerrilla war from South Sudan into Uganda, into Rwanda, and into the Congo. The people that were responsible for this include Paul Kagame and Yoweri Museveni, of course, who led the guerrilla movements in Uganda, Rwanda, and then the invasion of the Congo. But behind them are people in the United States, in Belgium, in France, in Switzerland, in Holland, in Israel, who we can name, including corporations that we can identify. We know who these people are, we know what they've done, but they are never held to account. Instead, we have the International Criminal Court, which is basically a kangaroo court, which is bringing charges against a few black Africans. It doesn't mean that the black Africans, in this case, are not culpable in some violence, but it does show the juxtaposition of power, where a mechanism, the International Criminal Court, has been devised to be used against certain countries, certain individuals, certain organizations, and other individuals, other countries, and other organizations are never held to account for mass murder, which includes the government of the United States, which includes Israeli Defense Forces, which includes the South African Army, who has been responsible for perpetrating massive violence in Central Africa. And I'm going to show you some pieces of this puzzle that we don't see in the mass media, we don't see in the European media, we don't see in the American media, we certainly don't see in the Canadian media. The major responsibility for violence in the region can be tied to these organizations or groups. The ADFL's Congo Zaire was the so-called rebel movement that invaded the Congo Zaire in 1996 and led this war from 96 to 97, which overthrew the longtime US, Israeli, British dictator Mobutu Sese Seko. The ADFL was actually Ugandan and Rwandan, and it was backed by the Pentagon. There were Israeli military forces, Israeli military commanders on the ground. There were Pentagon officials on the ground in 96 and 97. The Uganda People's Defense Forces and Rwandan Patriotic Front, two of the major armies responsible from 1996 to this moment for the ongoing, continuing violence in Central Africa, which includes Uganda, which includes Rwanda, Burundi, Congo, South Sudan, Central African Republic, violence in Kenya, some but small violence in Tanzania, and Ugandan People's Defense Forces and Rwandan Defense Forces are also contracted now to the Pentagon in our major theaters of war in Iraq and Afghanistan. So there's a very tight relationship between these forces and the violence in other parts of the world. The movement for the liberation of Congo, which arose in the so-called Second War in Congo, 1998, massive violence was perpetrated by the MLC, backed by Uganda and Rwanda. The RCD, backed by Uganda and Rwanda, created by Rwanda, backed by the United States, always, including the Pentagon, including Pentagon Special Forces, the National Congress for the Defense of the People, CNDP, and the current so-called rebel group in the Congo, M23. These are all creations of Uganda and Rwanda. So these are the major players of violence in the region. The Rwandan, so-called Rwandan genocide of 1994 culminated in forcing millions of people out of Rwanda, innocent, unarmed men, women, and children. Hundreds of thousands of these people were slaughtered in the Congo from 1998, 1999, 2000, and they continued to hunt these people throughout Africa, as far as Gabon, as far as Ivory Coast, and in Belgium, and in the United States. They're still hunting down people today who are innocent. They were not responsible for violence. They were not government officials. They were not even in Rwanda in 1994, but they're still being targeted by the international system as so-called genocidaires. On the ground, in the Congo, in 1998, the United States, USAID, we have satellite technology. We knew exactly what was going on. We knew that Rwanda was about to slaughter hundreds of thousands of innocent people. I encourage you to watch the film by Hubert Sauper, Kisangani Diaries. Hundreds of thousands of people killed in cold blood. Unarmed men, women, and children. Non-perpetrators. To give you an example of how USAID and United Nations High Commission for Refugees supported the violence and the killing of these refugees, the refugee camps in eastern Congo that UNHCR was responsible for 1994, 1995, 1996, the UNHCR World Food Program had plenty of food, but they were not feeding the refugees. When the Rwandan Patriotic Army invaded Zaire in 1996, the food that was destined for these refugees went to the Rwandan Patriotic Front. This was UNHCR and USAID. The Pentagon had C-130s flying troops into Zaire in 1996. So we can look at the people behind those Rwandan and Ugandan players, and that would be these people, these organizations: United States Central Command, Special Operations Command, and what is today AFRICOM. AFRICOM, the Africa Command, is building bases all over Africa. The propaganda system tells us that nobody in Africa wants to support an American base. But if you're from Kisangani in Congo, you know that there's an American base being built right there in Kisangani. Rwanda is an American military stronghold. Uganda is an American, Israeli, British military stronghold. After the major government forces of the United States, Canada, European Union forces, British forces, Belgian defense forces, the Zimbabwe Defense Forces have perpetrated massive violence in the Congo as well. This is President Mugabe. And the UN, I mentioned the UN High Commission for Refugees. The two UN so-called peacekeeping missions in the Congo are occupations of the Congo by foreign military forces supporting and backing corporations. They are not defending the people. They are not defending the sovereignty of the Congo. And then we have private military companies, of which I've given you several of the major ones there. Military Professional Resources, Saracen. Here you see a President Museveni shaking hands with a guy named Tony Buckingham, who was part of an organization called Executive Outcomes, and can be linked to all these private military companies. And oil companies who happen to have concessions on the border between Uganda and the Congo. The private military companies, in fact, I show those companies, the oil concessions here in the Lakes region. The private military companies, the oil companies, the diamond companies, they all require military protection. While there's massive bloodshed out in the field, you're also seeing all of the export of these products in the midst of this war. So you have parallel economies, an economy of bloodshed against the people of the Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, and Sudan. And you have an economy of plunder involving the corporations and businessmen flying in on jets, taking what they want, making hundreds of thousands of dollars in annual salaries alone. Guys like the former Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney. So at the height of the war in 96, 97, Barrick Gold Corporation came in right behind the supposed rebels, the Ugandan and Rwandan armies, and started to exploit a place called Kilomoto in the north of Congo. Here you see a minerals map of the mining in Congo today on the border between Uganda, actually Sudan, Central African Republic, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, amidst the bloodshed. The killing is continuing. Killing in Ituri continues. Killing on the border with Uganda up in the north. Killing on the Rwandan border and in the Kivus continues. And these are some of the major mining companies that are never, ever, ever, ever mentioned by the New York Times, or the Paris Review, or the London Observer. They never, ever mention these companies that are extracting the product as the killing continues. Some companies have operations in Congo, but also in places like Afghanistan. So we can directly tie, and Mongolia, we can directly tie the killing in Afghanistan to the same companies that are responsible for the killing in eastern Congo. And these concessions are vast, vast tracts of mining concessions. And in order to control the mining concession, you have to remove the people, or you have to convince them to participate. And if someone's ripping off your land, you're not very likely to participate. If people are raping your wife, killing your children, killing your neighbors, you're not likely to participate in a gold mining operation. So the best way to do this is to clear the people out, just as we cleared out the Native Americans back in the United States. The regions that I've investigated include, for example, this photo shows a field of skeletons that has not yet been dealt with in the Ituri region of the Congo. We know who was responsible for these killings. We know which corporations were involved. Let's look quickly at the different kinds of mining. We have these raw materials coming out of the Kivus and Minières, which are on the border, Lake Tanganyika, Rwanda, Burundi, that region. Everybody has a cell phone, laptop computer. We're all connected to the bloodshed in the Congo, which includes me. The mining is always blamed on the innocent people of the Congo. And the structures that are created to try to stop the mining in Congo are similar to the structures that were created to deal with so-called blood diamonds, where you have, like the International Criminal Court, you have a system which is blaming some people for killing and for blood diamonds, and excusing or denying or even supporting the profits of other people. So the people making all the money on blood diamonds are not the little African guy you see in the movie Blood Diamond. It's the big corporations. It's the De Beers, the Oppenheimers families. But they are the ones creating the mechanisms which make us think that it's these little guys involved in these little rebel movements who are African, who are responsible for blood diamonds, or blood minerals, or coltan. So the United States government has passed some of these laws that are completely protectionist in favor of the corporations and against the African individuals who are just trying to feed their families. So let's look at the rebel movements in Congo. Look at the uniforms these guys are wearing. This is the CNDP. This is all Ugandan and Rwandan backed by the Pentagon. If you're fooled, you've been reading too much of the New York Times. You've been reading too much of the BBC, or whatever your local newspapers are. The stuff goes out of these rural areas on these fancy little airplanes, some not so little, and the average person in Congo gets absolute destitution, destruction, and suffering. So Bibiche, for example, who at the age of 21 looked like that. By the age of 23, she looks like this. And by the age of 24, she's no longer alive. And this is what the mining companies in the Congo look like. I don't see any blood in that picture except the text that I put on there to make you remember that this is a blood-drenched area where Banro Gold Corporation is ripping off the people and deceiving all of us who don't want to be part of this. And the mass media is completely deceiving us because it's not mentioned. And look at the concessions that Banro controls. The yellow, red, green concessions in that picture are as big as, almost as big as the entire country of Rwanda. How is this possible? How is this possible that Banro Gold can do what it wants in this incredibly blood-drenched area, get its raw materials out, have a beautiful, clean, shiny facility like this, protected by private security companies, trucks and airplanes coming and going, taking the gold out to the market, while the people all around are dying and we're getting pictures and images of Congolese men raping Congolese women. This is not the Congo. These are Rwandan soldiers depopulating and destroying the life in the Banro regions for Banro Gold, for international directors in the United States, Australia, Belgium, France, Canada. So the blood minerals, I can give you more about that, but I'm going to move on. I've actually documented, I have documents from the Congo that show Rwanda's direct participation. It names the organizations, including DHL, the shipping company who's, the international shipping company like FedEx, who's responsible for shipping the minerals out of the Congo, never ever mentioned in the media. Instead, we get these stories about the Rwandan refugees who are still in the Congo, intent on overthrowing the government of Rwanda and perpetrating the ongoing genocide against the Tutsi people, which is one gigantic lie to begin with. Moving on, we have Casa Mining, also has two major mining concessions in the same region. The United Nations has had and continues to have big operations in these regions. They never protect the people. They never question the mining. In fact, some of the motive connections include connections to the mining companies. We can switch down to Katanga where the big mining goes on, and this is what it looks like. It dwarfs the mining in cell phone materials by millions and hundreds of millions of dollars. The cobalt and copper are the big money in the Congo. There's only one thing that makes more money in the Congo than cobalt and copper. But if you add up cobalt, copper, diamonds, gold, uranium, petroleum, natural gas, water, the forests, everything that can be extracted, you add up the value of all that, there's only one industry in Congo that's worth more money. And that's the misery industry. CARE, UNICEF, Save the Children. It's worth far more than the entire mining industry. So there's a direct connection between these mining operations, the creation of suffering, the creation of refugees, and the exploitation of the people in so-called relief operations. And I can give you details about the individuals like Philippe Dumurlus, who has a vast empire in Africa at this very moment. He's from Belgium, and he's never ever mentioned the slavery on the plantations that are never ever mentioned for chocolate, tea, cocoa, tea, rubber, and the other major one is palm oil. Child slavery that's never given to us, which involves white people from the United States and Britain who are pulling the strings and calling the shots and making this happen. People like the people who run Unilever Corporation. Unilever, by the way, owns Ben & Jerry's, the ice cream company that's supposedly environmentally friendly. Museveni, Unilever Corporation, big behind the plantations. And the diamonds, the blood diamonds, as I said, I can give you the names of the guys and the networks and how they operated and what happened. But they're never ever brought to account, held to account. The stripping and extractive industries go on. We can name the guys like this guy and his nephew who are in the middle of the suffering, which looks like this. And they're just ripping the place off, and the mass media is covering the entire thing up. To make this happen, there has to be a bigger network at the top, which involves intelligence operations, covert operations, and the propaganda in the mass media. And some of the organizations that are supposedly created to help the Congo, that are billed as non-government organizations, as relief operations, the IRC, the International Rescue Committee, the Raise Hope for Congo, STAND, Student Taking Action to Stop the Genocide in Darfur. The whole thing. These organizations are created by and for the corporations to cover it up and to make us give our money and our hearts to false organizations. Then we can excuse ourselves, we've done our share to help the Congo, we don't have to do anything else. But these are false organizations with false agendas, they are not grassroots, and they have massive media coverage in the New York Times, or the Wall Street Journal, or the Washington Post, etc. So on the ground in the Congo, in Uganda, in Rwanda, we have ethnic cleansing, special operations, which are responsible for slavery and torture, disappearing. These things, these tactics from the 1980s that occurred in Latin America are commonplace in Africa today. And it's not an African phenomenon. War crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide can be pinned on individuals sitting in Belgium, sitting in London, sitting in New York. We know who they are, we know their names, we know what they've done, we know how they've done it. But we have no access to the media. We have often no money to work with. We have no propaganda campaigns. But the truth on the ground for the Congolese people is they need your help to stop this nasty genocide against the Congolese people, the genocide against the Acholi people in Uganda, the genocide against the Anuak people in Ethiopia. And I'll stop there. And as far as in the questions and answer session, if you have questions, I can answer any question you have, and I do have some suggestions on what we need to do. Thank you very much.